Thank you so much for being here. I am so excited to have you come here and give us a little bit of perspective on yourself and just help us understand this entire, topic of women in technology and women in the C-suite a little bit better, help everyone who is on here with some insights that you may have. So let's begin with this. So on your LinkedIn, I see in your description, you begin with work in progress, learner, person of color, mom, board member, and then general manager at Microsoft. So I would love for you to give a little bit of introduction about yourself and maybe just why you have things in this order.
Well, thank you, Sangeeta. It is really delightful for me to be here. And I also appreciate so many people joining because I know many are joining from all over the world and majority of you are also based in India, which is where I am from. And I know it's 9:30 p.m. your time. So thank you for, choosing to be here and prioritizing this session. And I hope you get something meaningful out of it. Thank you, Sangeeta. So let's talk about my LinkedIn profile. And, it's not just about LinkedIn. I think the idea is, roles and titles can change based on companies that you go into. Sometimes they don't really mean anything. You're general manager at Microsoft. Perhaps people will feel like, oh, that means somebody who has more tenure and experience. But beyond that, it really doesn't give anybody any window into who I am, And so this is where I go back and I feel like I've won the lottery to be at Microsoft because our entire culture is founded on this notion of growth mindset. So when I think about myself and who the version of myself I was 20 years ago, growing up in India, coming here, 10 years ago, 5 years ago, and through this time, I think we as human beings are all work in progress. This is what the, human race is about in general. So that is something, because I am never going to be perfect. I will make mistakes. Failures will always be a part of who we are, who I am. And so I do embrace this notion of like, look, I'm working on it, construction in progress, deconstruction and reconstruction in progress. And so that is why it is just something I fundamentally believe in. I am all of those other things. I am constantly trying to learn because the more I learn, the more I feel I don't know. I mean, I keep taking on new roles and new challenges. And so there is this, like, we all have to upskill and reskill constantly. And so learning is a big part of that for me. And then, you sort of like never realize, but I do have a lot of mentees and women, especially, who come to me and said, so like, what do you have to give up? How do you prioritize to do all these things that you're now running at Microsoft? What does that mean? And it's important for me to uphold my identity of being a mom and taking care of a 10-year-old. And also like this board member, like, we all reach a point where we're like, what are we doing to pay it forward? Once you climb up, how do you go back and reach back in? And so there are certain topics and rights that I'm very, very passionate about. It's about kids, it's about education, it's about belonging, it's about women. And so, I do purposefully try to find time. We all have the same 24 hours, and I do invest a lot in our community, especially as it comes to kids. And so, I am a board member, I'm a chair of one of our nonprofits here in Seattle, and I'm very proud of that. So those are all the things, that's who I am. So it actually gives me a better platform to describe who I am, to then just say, hey, I lead blah, blah, blah at Microsoft, because that could change.
That's great. So just a little bit of overview on yourself, maybe a little bit about your beginnings, how you came about to be at Microsoft, a little bit about how your career went through the different stages at Microsoft.
Yeah, it's not a very interesting story, Sangeeta. I'll just tell you, I'll try to make it very interesting for everybody. But, everybody has their own career path. We all have our unique paths that we have been on. And so maybe, perhaps, hopefully people will find some similarities. But it is truly the story of many, many immigrants that come to the United States, especially when I think about, Asians and, Indians, to be more specific. Grew up in India, my family is from Delhi, and just like everybody else, I grew up in a time where, Y2K was the thing. And so you had choices to become an engineer, doctor, or a lawyer, because that's what you would do, because I wasn't smart enough to apply for what is that called? UPSC back then. And so I started pursuing my bachelor's in technology, and and I came to the United States back in 2000 in the pursuit of higher education. I definitely knew I wanted to get an MBA, and I explored the option. And so I sort of fell upon this profession of human resources, which until then was like this paper pushing personal management, employee relations. But I could start seeing what the value of human resources would be. So I applied for a dual degree in business and in HR. And the rest is sort of history, because that was the 1 year when Microsoft came on campus and they were looking for interns. And so I thought, okay, nothing can go wrong here, because if I fail miserably as to figuring out what this HR role is all about, I can always go back and pretend to be an engineer, which I did know coding and programming. So that was helpful. And that was 16 years ago. And so I have just stayed with this company. I've always been based in the headquarters in Redmond. I am in Seattle right now. And I've pretty much grown up in this company, grown old, I should say. And, I didn't have a child back then, and now I have my son and he's growing up, and, and eventually I've progressed in my career at Microsoft. The thing that I've learned, I did not see, and I think many of us say this, I did not see myself saying, my gosh, I've been at Microsoft 16 years. I still cannot believe it, because I love change. I change homes, I change colors of my walls, I change my cars, I always take things on lease. I really like that excitement of change. And I think human beings too, we say we don't like change, but we all do like change. We don't want to eat the same food. We don't want to wear the same clothes. We want to go experience new things, music. I mean, if you really deep down think about that, human beings do fundamentally love change. And so I don't know why we say we don't like change, because we do. But for me at Microsoft, the idea is I go back to saying, like, I love this notion of being a learner. And as long as I feel like I'm learning something new, I'm being pushed a little bit, I am a little bit in my, in an uncomfortable zone where I feel like I'm stretched, that's all that really keeps me going. And so Microsoft has really provided me the platform to do that. And so in my last, and I'll be quick here, so because I know most people on this call are not from human resources, so I don't want you to bore you with the function, but I've held roles at Microsoft, which is called an HR business partner or a generalist, where I have sat with senior business leaders across the company for the last dozen years to work with them on their succession plan, their strategy, their workforce plans, on their own leadership one-on-one and coaching. And I have been able to do that because Microsoft is a massive company. So I've seen a growth of the company, but also I've been doing that for functions such as engineering, for acquisitions that have happened, for our sales organization, for our marketing organization, for our business development organization, manufacturing, supply chain, procurement. Because even though we are a tech company, we have all of those functions. So it's given me a really great 360 view into what this company is about. And most recently, I've taken on a new role, which I'm happy to talk about later. But yeah, that's sort of my journey.
Great. So as you said, you kind of, grew up with Microsoft in Microsoft, right? So as you went through your professional life, were there things that you thought that you needed to fight for? And were you clear on what kinds of things you wanted to fight for? And, what were the things that mattered to you the most? And I'm sure as you went through the points in your career that things probably changed. So were there things that you were really, passionate about that you really wanted to or needed to fight for?
I think this question could pretty much take our call, away, Sangeeta. So please hold me to time, and we can keep exploring. But I think this is the ultimate question. What you're talking about is, how do we all as human beings navigate the environment that we are a part of, and finding that courage to fight for things that you believe in, whether that's at work or in society, in professional life, personal life, etc. So that is the question, existential question. And it's not an easy question. Why? Because, and I talk a lot about human beings as this collective, billions of people that we have, because I am deeply interested on that topic. Look, I have my own set of trepidations and fear. None of us are free of fear, and that fear can be different sorts of fear for different people. But I'll just start by saying, I think every single person on this call may have had a fear either today, yesterday, or at some point during their many months or years to say, I am not enough. I will be judged. I don't want to come across as imperfect. I don't want to come across as the dumbest person in the room. I do not want to come across as unprepared. I do not want to come across as too ambitious. I don't want to come across as too humble. I don't want to come across as super authentic. And like, there is no right answer. And so I have struggled with the exact same things all my life, and I'm still work in progress, going back to my title on that. So I've had those fears and trepidations for forever. And yet there has been some turning points, and either it's a conversation with your sponsor or your mentor or role models to say, how does this person do it? Because I have watched people sort of let it go in the meeting and sort of make themselves smaller and like not really raise their voice. But I've also seen people who do bring up the tough, messy topics to the table and say, excuse me, let me finish. I am not done. I want to be heard. Let me, prove my point. And when I go and talk to those people, what I did learn is they have the same fears. We talk a lot about this buzzword of imposter syndrome, or Cinderella's, a syndrome is like, oh, at some point, like all of this will be taken away from me. People will know. And as you get more senior, and we have a lot of very senior people on this call, I actually think that the bar even raises higher. So more people have that. And so for me, at least, the mantra is what I would say for me has been, first of all, the aha moment, the self-awareness to say, this is just going to be there with me for life. This fear of, name it, whatever those fears are, I outlined some, it's just going to be there, first of all. So how do I just be self-aware, acknowledge that it's going to be there, and yet courage comes from fear, because if there is no fear, there is no courage. So then acknowledging your fear and saying, okay, how do I not let fear be in the driver's seat? They can have a seat on my journey and in my car, but they probably are in the passenger seat sitting and, trying to lead me where do I need to go, but I am in charge. And then one time, one moment at a time, walking through that courage. So for me, I've heard things like, Priya, you are too outspoken. You are too ambitious. You are too bold. You speak your mind. And those things don't naturally come to me because I'm crippled by the same anxieties and fears of being judged and labeled and all of that. But the more research I have done, Sangeeta, like I was looking at a research from MIT, which said it is such a double whammy. And I know we have lots of, people who identify as male colleagues on the call as well, but it applies to both gender. I mean, all genders. I shouldn't just say both genders, all genders is women are expected, there is a gender bias. Women are expected to less advocate themselves. Women are expected to be quieter. Women are expected to be more grateful. And then on top of that, if a woman then actually walks through all of that and raises her voice, she's not liked. People don't like that personality, and so acknowledging that and still walking through some of those things is important. And so that's what I've tried to do all my life, is acknowledging my own fears and still walk through that and raise my voice and, and be the self-advocate that I need to be for myself and for others around me.
Okay. So I'm going to, this is super relatable to me, as you can imagine. So what do you do when people come and say, oh, you're too bold or you're too outspoken? I know within yourself, you know what you are and you know what you want, but how are you dealing with these messages that you're getting from people, where they're saying, maybe you should dampen it down?
These are such deep philosophical questions, Sangeeta, and it's easier said than done. So when I say it, it'll resonate and say, yeah, sure. But when you have to do it and practice it, it is freaking hard. Because nobody likes those labels. I mean, think about what's happening with social media and the trolling. It's hard for like very capable, successful celebrities and people out there. Like nobody likes that, right? And so I think the work we have to do has to start from within, because if you really are grounded and you really are centered and you know what you are about and what your own pursuit and journey is, and sort of pay a little bit, I'm not saying to be tone deaf, but sort of pay a little less attention to what people's perception of me are. I mean, that's what I try to do. So cut the noise that is not helpful. You know why? Because your biggest critic are not people who are coming to you and saying you that you're bold. It is the loudest voice is the voice in your own head that's saying, don't say that because people will perceive that you're bold or you are too selfish or you're like being, too ambitious. So I think it starts there. And I actually think over time, and then there is this whole thing about delivery. So, I mean, just don't be bold and ambitious and, rampant just for the sake of it. It has to come from a very deep place to say like, why? Because, I had another aha moment because, I've been doing so much research on this topic and speaking to, thousands and thousands of women at Microsoft. We have a women's employee resource group, and you can only imagine we have like 60,000 people globally from 200 countries in that. So I do have the privilege and opportunity to connect with people of all, ages and generations and cultures. What is common for at least females is, I remember growing up, my mom used to eat last. I'm sure it's true for people even today. People on the call is like, yep. Or my grandmother, like waiting to make sure everybody's fed. And then if whatever is remaining and left, whatever that may be, they will eat last. Why? Because I was told and taught the virtues of being selfless, which at the time seemed awesome. It's like, oh, great. Like, this is the utopian world we live in. Let's all be selfless. However, the problem is not everybody is selfless. It doesn't equitably apply. The selflessness theory doesn't equitably apply to all genders. And so the aha that I've had recently is selfless is actually a really poisonous word in some senses. Meaning, if you really break that word down, it is meaning that you start from a place of you are less of your own self. And so the opposite of selfless is not selfish. In my mind, just because you're not selfless doesn't mean you're selfish. If you're not, you have to be full of yourselves in a very positive way, because even when I say those words like full of yourself, it has a very negative connotation. People cringe, like, oh my gosh, she's so full of herself.
Full of herself.
I know, but like, look, I mean, don't we say that put your oxygen mask first? Like, if you are not a whole person and you don't honor yourself, both men, women, all, it's like, it applies to all of us.
Yes.
You can't pour anything from an empty cup. And so I think for me, the journey has been recognizing that, going underneath these things that we use as shorthand things, selfless, selfish, ambitious, to like, why, and then saying, okay, so where do I want to play in this? Does my path look like? And how can I still do it as being humble and authentic and generous and helping everybody else out, but in that process, not dimming my own light and diminishing myself. So that is what this is about. I don't think these are two extreme situations, that either you're completely selfless or you're like, the Robin Hood that is helping it. Like, I think there is a healthy in between that we have to practice more.
Yeah, no, you're so right. I always tell my mom, why are you trying to be a martyr over here? So you're right. We need to be self-aware and self-fulfilling in a way, Since you said that, I did want to speak to you about your latest post that I saw about where you actually took a step back for some rest and rejuvenation. Can you talk a little bit about that? Because let me tell you, I am already seeing so many messages on chat over here. I don't know if you are seeing them, of women saying, I relate, I'm having my aha moment. I like completely agree about women having to self-advocate. So I'm sure if you can talk a little bit about, the decision that you made recently and how you went about it and how it helped, that would be great.
I would be happy to, Sangeeta. So let's remember that question. So you want to talk about my time off.
Yes.
I told you I'm a mom. So I have a 10-year-old boy, who is born here, who I'm trying to grow, still being that annoying Indian mom that I am. I think a lot of us can again relate to these things. But there is an author who I dearly, dearly love and admire. Her name is Glennon Doyle. And the reason I admire her is she's very polarizing to audiences. And I will let you check her out and I'll let you read her books and all of that. But her most recent book, which came around the pandemic time, is called Untamed. And the book is a little bit about, she's a feminist, right? So let's just put it out there. Like the book is about how women especially have been tamed across generations, across centuries, across cultures, across countries. And so the book is about like this process of untaming a little bit, and letting your real like natural strengths show up in a way that they should, so that we can tap into, each one of us as human beings and individuals can tap into that bigger potential that we all have. But there is because, I think every question that you've asked till now, Sangeeta, and this full process of self-advocacy goes back to doing the work, starting with you, doing the hard inner work. It's almost like a strength training, but for
Yes.
your mind, for yourself to like be ready for that moment that will happen the next time where somebody, and it can be another female, by the way, let's be very clear, who's going to shut you off because there is some power dynamics in there, and what are you going to do about it? Or somebody who's going to shame you for being full of yourself. And in that moment, how do you stand up for yourself? And so this is the practice of strengthening. But I found it very fascinating, because I read a lot about because I have a 10-year-old that I need to make sure is a decent human being in this society eventually. But so she talked about this moment in her just home where she said, I had a couple of my teenager girls there, and I also had a bunch of teenager boys in the same room. And I know many of us are parents. And so she said they were like doing their own thing. Both groups were like segregated, doing their own thing. And so she walks in and she says, hey, like, anybody hungry? Would you guys like to eat? And what would you like to eat? So the boys were all on their game controllers playing games, and they, without even looking, unflinchedly said, we want pizza. We're hungry. Yep, we would like pizza. Here's all the toppings we would want. Great. The girls, on the other hand, they looked at each other and said, are you hungry? Are we hungry? What do we want to eat? What should we have? Should we wait a little bit? So this indecisiveness started happening. Why? Because they were looking for that, I don't know what, affirmation,
Right.
not within themselves. Like, are you hungry? Like, is your body hungry right now? Versus, are we hungry? Like, how, would you judge me if I eat right now? You know what I mean? And so how do we close that gap to say, like, because there is one group of people that quickly made that decision and were decisive and they know what they want. And the other group is like sort of walking through this trepidating, like, oh, I mean, you get my point. I don't think I'm doing a great job articulating, but what happens is these people will grow up, and in 5 years, they will join our workforces. And then they will need to have conversations about time off and negotiations and salaries and promotions and the next big shiny project. And guess who will show up more confidently and make the asks?
True. Very true.
I just, it really resonated with me. And I want us to like really think about that as we are even like, thinking about growing up the next generation and being responsible for that. So in that vein, let me talk about reconstructing myself. So as I said, I'm very grateful and privileged to feel like I've had the sort of career trajectory I've had at this company at Microsoft. And I also am very aware that not everybody has a career trajectory like that. And it has come up with its own set of things that I had to give up along the way because I thought that was the only way. So things like I would work, insane number of hours. I would be working on weekends. I would always say yes to everything, even if I'm at the point of completely burning out, because I thought that was the only way out, and it got me to a place, especially in the middle of the pandemic, where we were all working from home and I was doing just like everybody else, cooking and cleaning here because we don't have help in the US as much, taking care of my 8-year-old back then who was struggling with virtual and all of that at home. And it was nonstop. And I got to a point where I was trying to do it all. And then the other aspect I want to bring in is for many people, we are also leading other people. We are team leaders. We are people managers. And so it is actually even harder. Not only are you taking care of your own needs, of your family's needs in these times, or like even post-pandemic. I mean, the pandemic is really not over, but at least the wave that we are talking about. And then I had people who were getting divorced, because it was really the great realization and rethink period for people who were taking care of sick people who lost loved ones. Yes. And so in that, I started again, talk about being selfless. I was practicing a lot of selflessness, meaning I'm going to put myself last because I can help all these people. And women tend to do that. And I got to a point where I ended up in a doctor's office. I was getting iron infusions every week. And they basically said I'm on the verge of a complete body failure and nervous breakdown. And it was a big awakening for me. And so for the first time, I overtly, and not that I didn't have vacation to take and holidays to take, I just thought that would not look okay to people. And it would show up as, oh, Priya is really not engaged. Priya is giving up. Maybe she's thinking of leaving at some point. This may be starting to send some mixed signals, And this was all in my head. I was my worst critic because the only thing that was preventing me from taking a pause and taking care of me was me. Because everybody else would be very happy for me. And you know what? It actually gives them permissioning. And so, I mean, unfortunately, I dragged myself to this point here. I'm talking about self-advocacy. I was a really poor example of self-advocacy. Let's just put it out there. And now I reflect back on that, and I highly regret that I got to that situation. And I had to be very vulnerable. And I sent the most vulnerable message to all my teams and said, here is where I am. And I need to take care of me, and I need to be completely plugged off and just go and just be human and be out there and get my walks and get my meals and drink water and get 8 hours of sleep, like basic human needs. Because it cannot be either or. We cannot be great at work and just kill ourselves in the process, which I know many of us do. And I was almost carrying it as a badge of honor. It's like, oh my gosh, look, Priya can do 7 a.m. calls and she can also do 9 p.m. calls. Wow, she's a Wonder Woman. Really not, because I'm crumbling underneath that, pressure, because we will. And I didn't, when I did that, it was more to explain, and I didn't quite fathom the effect, the ripple effect of what that message would do. Because then I started hearing from my male colleagues, like people across the company saying, we are so glad that you put it out there, Priya. And I wasn't trying to be like this, oh my gosh, look, finally, like I have awakened and I'm doing this. Because they said, I am feeling it too. And I've had my own fair share of this too. And this is why this is super important for each one of us, and especially people who are in a little bit more of a visible role, to role model, because then other people can say, I need this too, because I'm almost like about to crack, and this fake badge of honor gets us nowhere. And then I know it's not a Microsoft call, so thank you, but I've had the best year. I've had lots of great years at Microsoft, but we just went through our performance, cycles here and reward cycle. And I feel like I've really had an amazing year, because my cup is full. I can be more present. I'm less frustrated. I'm more intuitive. I have better ideas. And so there's like this whole thing, but the permissioning piece of that was me to be vulnerable and humble about my own needs, and have these fear of judgment, everything that I just said, like, what if people think like, oh, Priya doesn't have it in her, she can't do this, she's probably escaping, it's an escape. To set up, no, I really need this for my body, put it out there, be the role model, and just sort of, lead from that place of vulnerability. And it has paid off humongously. I still have work to do, because I'm getting back into that trap again. I just took on a new role, and I feel like all my, good habits is flowing out of the window, but I have to hold myself accountable, because nobody else will.
Yeah. And, I guess also as women, sometimes you worry about the perception even more, because sometimes it's more about the society and the community we live in also, right? Where when you're working so hard, when you're working from like a hospital room, it's kind of glorified. Like, look at this person is in the hospital room and they're still working. And really, that should not be the case, right? So I really appreciate that. We are coming really, really close to the end. I want to make sure there's time for people to ask questions. So I'm going to ask you one thing real quick. You have been fortunate, like you said, to be working at Microsoft, to have a very supportive team. I feel the same way about Intelliswift, really, really supportive leadership team, everybody, right? But what of people who are not in supportive environments? What can they do? Or what can companies who are not yet aware of these things, what can the companies do in order to provide that supportive environment? And, I'm going to like lean upon your HR knowledge also for this.
Thank you, Sangeeta. Well, let me share with you what I intended to share. So this, hopefully there's a connection back to the question, but okay. I know we are primarily talking about women here, and the issues that we all face, as the female gender. However, let me just give you some other context, because I'm also looking at lots of amazing male colleagues on the call. And again, coming back to like, there are some core and common underlying needs and themes for all of us as human beings. So at Microsoft, we have done, look, I did not grow up here. I loved cricket. I'm still a big cricket fan, but I know that football is apparently a thing. And so with that, we have this team here, which my son adores, Seahawks. Seattle Seahawks, they've won the Super Bowl a couple of times. And so the coach for Seattle Seahawks is actually a very remunerated coach. His name is Pete Carroll. Mm-hmm. And so the coach works with, they have a pair. And so they work with another coach. His name is Dr. Michael Gervais, and he's actually from Silicon Valley. By the way, many of you who love podcasts or who picked up the habit of podcasts, His podcast is called High Performance Mindset, I think, or Finding Mastery. He's probably changed his branding, so I don't remember which one, but it's one of those, Finding Mastery or High Performance. And so Dr. Gervais he's done a PhD, and his PhD is all about high performance. And his focus is with Olympians who are training for the Olympics. So he works with winners and sports people who have already crossed all barriers, flown into like limitless like ways of tapping into their own human potential to go that final extra 1/10 of a second. And he really trains them on high performance. So we, within Microsoft, Satya and his leadership team, and of course, I'm very privileged to get to work with Dr. Gervais very, very closely. And I think he's played a very big role in me trying to translate that high performance mindset for me and what it means. And so what I wanted to share is, let me give you some ahas that I've had,
Okay. Yes, please.
which is multitasking is, let me make sure I don't swear on this call, is not possible. It's a myth. So if we feel like we can be on a Teams call or a Zoom call and somebody is sitting in the room, and I can also effectively do emails and have brilliant ideas, the prefrontal cortex of the brain, because he does brain study, just doesn't operate that way. The brain can only do one linear task efficiently and effectively at a single point. And so remember that. So when women think I can, like do 5 things, and, even our goddesses have 12 hands, it's just not like that. Manifestation is not real. So that's one. The other is, he talks about how important this idea of rest is, because outside of that rest, you cannot truly perform at a high performance level. And that's what he teaches sportsmen, because that's at least his, and business leaders, by the way, CEOs of Fortune 50 companies is who Dr. Gervais works with, including Satya, for example. And so this idea of resting, basic idea of, are you drinking enough water? Are you eating nutritious food? Are you going out and getting air? Like, are you in nature? How are you flexing your brain? How do you have quiet time? Because the brain the neurons connect and forms patterns to come up with new ideas only when it's in a state of rest. So most of our insights come to us when we are taking a shower, when we are driving, commute time, when we are just waking up from sleep or sort of rewinding. And so when companies think about innovation and new areas of growth and new businesses and new products, it's not going to happen when you are in a room endlessly going through the same thing and sitting in meetings for 15 hours with 20 people. And you're like, why was I invited to this meeting again? That's not where the idea comes. And so for us, that was very important to acknowledge and recognize. Why? Because it gave us a permission to say, in fact, we want you to take time off. So, I'm taking time off. Before Labor Day, I'm taking time off. I'm in a new role. I have to come up with a vision for what a premier talent management function at Microsoft can do. And I'm not going to do that while I'm, having one-on-ones with my people. And so just know that it's not just a nice to have and a feel good. It's actually backed by science. And that's what we are asking our senior most leaders to do in the company. And so do that too. Because when you think about somebody writing their best bestseller, they go and lock themselves up in a cabin. They're walking by a beach. Why? Because creativity only happens when you have that sort of space and time, and it's critical. So I just wanted to share that. And so then we went deep and we talked about even the origin of the word recreation, because recreate, like before you create something new, you have to recreate yourself. And so recreation is all about taking that time off. It's not like, oh my gosh, like, thank you, the company is offering. It actually is beneficial for the bottom line of the company to take that time off. Yes. And big places like Europe do it amazingly well, where everybody's off in August. And so that's less. And coming back to teams and organizations and our behaviors, I would start with now knowing this science, and please go and research more on this, but it is very true. And starting to embrace that and starting to talk about that. It also starts with this place of role modeling. Like, we block our calendars and say, today is my learning day. Because I don't know what I'll be doing. I'll be listening to a podcast, walking out in the park or the trail or like whatever, but today I need to focus on imagining and dreaming and envisioning and learning and what's happening in the industry. And so the more we can start doing that, the better off we will be. And the way that the company can help is start to also focus on, and I can speak for Microsoft, we focus a lot of our money and dollars on benefits. And those benefits are like annual checkup, visual checkup, dentist, like, all these things that we offer. And now we are putting equal amount of focus and investment into mental well-being. And again, it's a freaking buzzword at this point, but what does that mean? Can we get a high performance coach for me if I wanted one? Can I talk about my mental situation? Can I have a career coach? Can I go and tap into my mentors, not for how to go and, focus on my work related skill, but like how to become more creative, how to balance my life better. And so we just got everybody this, licensing for Headspace so that people can meditate on their own for 5-10 minutes. Because again, talk to any CEO in the Fortune 100, everybody swears by meditation.
Right.
So there must
Actually,
be something. Yeah.
We have that too. We have
Great.
this mind space, right? Or
Yes,
headspace. Yeah. In fact, I have to tell you, one of the things that I do, because we use Microsoft at work, and one of the things I like is your Viva that comes up every morning.
Yes.
Which reminds you, I actually look at that, I will, and I'm not a person who will look at emails that are not pertinent normally, but that's one thing. Every morning I will look at it and say, okay, quiet hours. Okay, this is what I will need to. And so that I think is really important, because you need to get that focus in the morning before you start the day. So I think that's great. Great. And, thank you. I mean, thank Microsoft on my behalf, please. Do you have any kind of advice you can give to be kind to yourself and to celebrate accomplishments? I think that's the other part, right? That we kind of fail to even recognize ourselves. So that's one of the questions.
Yeah, I don't know if I have great tips on it. I mean, it really starts with like, just do it, and it seems so simple, but we can all do hard things. And we just, again, like, I think for me, the place where it starts is like, A, talking about these issues, which we are doing today. B, reflecting on yourself, self-reflection, and being aware and having those aha moments, which I think people are having. It's like, oh, me too. Because, I remember once a couple of years ago, sitting down with one of my very senior mentors. And this was we call it Microsoft Building 34, where our CEO sits and the senior most people in the company sit. And I happened to be on that 5th floor where, we have our senior most leaders. And I was in a room and I was like, I literally was crying because I had just come back from mat leave. I had taken on a job, which was the integration of Link and Skype back then, which is now Microsoft Teams. So we have evolved and we've taken the best from all these worlds. And my team was based in London, and the Skype team was based in Tallinn in Estonia. And so while I was getting no sleep with a little one at night, and I'm still feeling brain fog after my 5 months of mat leave. And then I'm like, what is going on? I feel I am losing it, and I don't feel like I'm at my A game, and just like being very, very vulnerable to say, like, are you guys really sure you want me to be leading this integration right now? Are you out of your mind? Because I feel like any day everybody will find out that I'm not capable, that I'm not that smart, that I'm not that, all those things. And I had the honor and privilege to have somebody where I could be so vulnerable and then break into tears. And I remember, first she got me tissues and she said, Priya, you know who sits on this floor? I mean, the head of Microsoft Office, engineering, Teams, cloud, AI, like basically everybody on that floor could potentially be a CEO of an S&P 500. That's it,
Yeah.
And male, female, doesn't matter, generation. And they said they all have the same fear, and they all have that same imposter syndrome, including perhaps our CEO, because he grew up in this company. And it's like, wow, the external market, the board, like everybody's now looking at me to do what, And so then she said, so what matters the most is not that everybody has it, but what you do with it, And so that's what I want to come back to, is like, knowing that you have it is fine, but how do you still, instead of, because I talked about courage, and courage comes from a place of fear, and going through your fears, acknowledging those fears, honoring them and saying, I hear you, you can have your voice, but again, you are not in the driver's seat, and doing it anyways, and so going after that job. I mean, I was in a great job, very comfortable, knew what I was doing. I felt awesome. And yet I just took on a job that has like shaken me, from within, to say, this is the job. Every job I have taken, I felt like, okay, this time they will find out for real. And this is the job that will get me fired, and it hasn't. And I think that's true. I mean, maybe once in a while that could happen for somebody, but for most of us, It won't. And so keep pushing yourself anyways, because that is the difference between people who are successful and people who are not. People who innovate, people who start companies, and people who don't, because everybody starts with ideas on the back of a napkin, and some people actually go pursue that with calculated risks and others don't. And so that's all I have to say on that.
Okay. Well, I guess I'm an Aries, so I go headlong into stuff and then think about it later. So in that way, I'm very much an Aries. Sindhu, remember I mentioned to you, she recently got married, and and she fairly recently joined our company, and she is saying she's loving this conversation. Her key takeaway from this conversation is definitely better prioritization. If I say yes to this, what am I saying no to is a constant question for her. And so she's asking, looking back at your super successful journey, what would you tell your 20-year-old self to credit to all the wonderful things that you have achieved?
Wow.
So basically, yeah.
I wish I was still 20-year-old, Sindhu, first of all. I'm still in denial. Good question. So I'll share a little story, because earlier on the call, Sangeeta, when you and I were just, prepping and joining, we talked about, where I am right now and that this is my real background. So during the pandemic, just like many people, we all had like big ahas. We bought a new house, we bought a piece of land and we started building. So I live in Seattle and we live in this place called Woodinville. And so we moved into this home back in Feb. But in that process of moving, I found lots of stuff that I was like, why do I have this? I need to donate them, like I'm a hoarder, like when moving happens. So anyways, in that, I found a journal, and I do love journaling and I do love writing. I don't do it frequently, but every now and then I do. And so I found a journal which had a page in it, and that page was called My Indelible Mark. So my indelible mark, I'll let you guys look that up. And it was a exercise that we had done at Microsoft about 10-ish years ago. This is just when I had come back from mat leave, and I was talking about Link and Skype, and I had just had a team that I all of a sudden started leading, because that's when I became a people manager. And it was like, okay, what would you tell yourself in 10 years from now? What is the indelible mark you want to leave for people around you? And I wrote, whatever I wrote. And I remember when I found that journal now, 10 years later, I'm a different person. I've grown up and grown old and all that, more experiences under my wings. That page had a lot of tear marks on it. And so again, when I held that, I was trying to like shuffle things like, what am I going to donate? What am I going to throw away? What am I going to trash as I move into my new home? And it had things like, it was like, basically the question was my main indelible mark, and what are the things that I would hope for myself 10 years from now? So that is what that exercise was. And so that I'm going to come back to your question here, Sindhu, but I wrote things like, my hope for me is that I'm less apologetic. My hope for me is that I don't shrink myself in conversations. My hope for me is that I do take all the space and time I need and not feel guilty about it or nervous about it. My hope for me is go back and reach out to all the other people who still need to climb this wall and this ladder. And so when I was so emotional back then, like I just had come back from mat leave, that I could see my teardrops from 10 years ago on that. And so when I looked at that again, like I kept it, of course, because it was so precious, but there is so much power in writing things down, because I'm like, wow, I am trying my absolute best to make some of those things real. So that would be my hope for my 20-year self, is to take the space and take the room and not be the quiet person in the room and not feel like paralyzed by like, I have the dumbest question in the room. I am the junior most person. I have nothing important to say, because I'll tell you, I came to Microsoft as an intern, first of all. So one of the programs that I lead, many programs, is I also run the whole college hiring intern program for the company. And because it's just so near and dear to my heart, because I want to show them that this is possible for you as well. And I see them struggle with that. And they sometimes don't speak up because they're like, who am I? I'm like, well, you know more about technology and apps and trends than any of us, because we are still beating around the bush and guessing and hypothesizing. So that's what I would tell my younger self, is like, be more unapologetic, be more full of yourself, know your fears, but walk through them. And the last thing I would say is, when I first came to the States, 20 years ago, I had this real moment of feeling like, what's the word I'm looking for? Imposter is not the right word, but I recently learned, I read a book by Kenji Yoshino. And his book is called Covering. And, he's a gay man in America. But anyways, he talks about covering of all sorts. And that means covering that you just got married, covering that you have a baby at home, covering that you need mat leave, covering that you have a disability of whatever kind, like for me, it was covering that I come from India and I really have no exposure to baseball and football, and my accent would give it away, and that I love Indian food and I love Bollywood music. So I tried really hard to fit in and assimilate in this monoculture. And that is very, very tiring. And so my biggest promise to myself is I am me, honoring my roots, my journey, my trials, my tribulations, and being more of me, because the rest is very tiring and it's all taken away.
It is. It is. It is. And we are like, I know we are well beyond time, but there is one more question from Madhavi. So I am going to ask this question. I promise, last question. Okay. So she says that, what are your thoughts? There are people who say, especially in a company environment, like, oh, does so-and-so not have your back? And her question is it your skills and ability or efforts and hard work? What should be the counting factor that gets you to where you are? Or is it something completely different?
These are amazing questions, first of all. And I've never seen a group ask such great questions. So this is great. And we could go on for another hour, as you said, Sangeeta, but I have also not had my breakfast and you talked too much about food earlier. So I think, look, just like everything in life, the answer is it depends. And you cannot take just a look at one silo context in this process. And so the question you are is like, yes, absolutely. Your skills, your ability. I mean, when we look at, because, right now my job is making sure we have succession planning for the top 50 jobs at Microsoft. It's a very scary role to be in, but starting with who's going to be the next Satya to the next LT to that, because it really has implications on Wall Street. So that is what keeps me up at night. And it's a very hard thing to go after. Do you grow people internally? Do you bring people from external? Who do you take bets on? Because we don't even know what the industry needs in about 5 years. We have no idea, and so this notion of, so what we look at is we look at aspiration, dream big. That's where I say, don't shrink yourself, whoever you are. And if you aspire, like, do they even have aspiration? And, I love the word aspiration more so than ambition, because it's like, who are we all aspiring to be? Because that's the whole work in progress piece to me. So aspiration, ability is important, and so the whole knowledge, skills, ability, the KSA piece, the competency piece, yes, the ability, because you can have all the goddamn aspiration in the world. If you have no ability, it's not going to go anywhere, And then once you have those two things, so yes, let's say I aspire to be the next, chief HR officer for blah, or chief people officer or whatever. And I also sort of have the ability. What I have today will not get me to my espoused to place. So what I need in addition to that is the commitment on a daily basis to be the learner, to experiment, to work on myself. So aspiration, ability, and commitment is how I think about it. And then let's also face this. It cannot be, in Hindi, there is a saying around like, you can't clap with one hand, right? That stands true for most things in life in mind. It's a very profound saying in my mind. I use it all the time, which is, sometimes you may have all of those three things and you may just be in a very toxic culture or an industry that just doesn't care for it, or a management system or a sponsorship system that just doesn't exist. And so it is on you to change that. Don't wait for somebody to come and rescue you. You be a participant in your own rescue. The firefighters don't always show up. So that's also what I would say. And so the reason I am at Microsoft and I'm not at many other places, which I'm not going to outline here today, so I can be more of myself, is because I feel like I have those three things, and yet the company offers me the village of sponsors and supporters and networks, and the company actually fundamentally believes in that. So it's a little bit of that self-selection process, I would say. And then, of course, you need a very small group of people who are always going to be there for you when you felt like this is the time I have royally messed up. I'm going to use the
and we all do. We do.
And they will remind you that this shall too pass, and you are better than that.
That's great. What that last part actually has given me goosebumps of everything you said, the commitment, the aspiration, the support. So thank you. I really, really appreciate it. There are so many appreciative messages on the chat. Sindhu especially wants to say thank you. I am so glad that we could reach out to folks like Sindhu and like Madhvi, who is already way senior in our company. So thank you for covering all bases.
My
It's not
pleasure,
cricket
my privilege,
terminology,
my
but
honor. And you can find me on LinkedIn. I think you can find us all, and it's been a real pleasure. So thank you, Suraj and Sagita and Kristen, for making this happen. And by the way, to investing in something like this for Intelliswift, I think it's a great practice. I love it. And I got as much energy, and I want to read the chats later. I don't know how. So Kristen, maybe you can copy paste and send it to me, but I would love to go through them. So thank you very much.